Everybody ready?
Sure.
It being 6:07 p.m., I'm going to call the Clayton Planning Board meeting to order for the month of June 2022. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Hearing none. Did everybody have an opportunity to review the minutes? The minutes were sent out via email. Are there any corrections to the minutes? I'll entertain a motion to approve or deny the May 23rd minutes.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Board Member Powers,
Second.
second by Board Member Dupree. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We're going to modify the agenda just a little, waiting for a member to arrive, one of our presenters. So next on the agenda, we're going to move to item 7 and come back to item 4. Take that. To allow the planning board director to give his update.
All right, can you hear it? Is this working?
No.
Is this thing on?
It's been dropped a few times.
This is supposed to be working. While our consultant is making his way here, he's running just a little bit late this evening due to traffic, but he should be here shortly. I was just going to give the board a quick update on a few things with the department. One, we are now fully staffed, so please welcome Love Ott, who's sitting over there in the corner helping us take minutes tonight. She will be the board secretary moving forward, so at the next meeting, you'll still see Bruce. He'll be helping train Love at the next meeting, and then after that, Love should be taking over as board secretary from then on. So if you need anything or have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with Love, and you'll start seeing emails come from her shortly as well. So she'll be your primary contact for both the Board of Adjustment and for the Planning Board. Also wanted to give an update. As you may be aware, the Town Council did adopt their budget for the next fiscal year last week. As part of that budget, there is funding for the town to begin work on a transportation plan. So the planning department is the lead for that. It is in our budget, so we will begin working on that here shortly, working on putting together a request for qualifications and get that out to consultants. I would expect at this point we will be looking to select consultants probably sometime in the fall. At this point, it's probably mid to late fall, but we will work on getting that started so we can get started on that plan. The council did, they approved half of the request that was originally submitted. So there is some expectation that we may receive additional funding for next fiscal year. We do expect the transportation plan to be about an 18-month process, so it will go over 2 fiscal years. Also, on Tuesday night, the council approved a budget amendment for us to begin working on 2 small area plans. We have selected consultants and are in the process of finalizing and executing those contracts now this week. One is a downtown small area plan that we expect to kick off in mid-July with the consultant. And then the second plan is the future I-42, NC-42 small area plan, which is centered roughly around the existing interchange with NC-42 and the US 70 bypass, which, as you all know, the US 70 will become I-42 here within the next, hopefully 6 months to a year or so, as soon as they get the signage put in place. So that plan, that small area plan, should kick off in mid to late July as well. Both the small area plans will be running pretty much concurrently with this Unified Development Code update process. We do expect the downtown master plan update to provide some guidance for the Unified Development Code update, primarily in the downtown overlay area. So we're looking forward to kicking off that project and getting some recommendations from that plan as far as some code changes for the downtown area specifically. For the other small area plan, I do not know that we'll necessarily have much in the way of code recommendations coming out of that, but it will definitely provide some guidance. And one of the things that, the other small area plan, the future I-42, NC-42 small area plan will be looking at is, it actually is, we've identified that plan to look out all the way to Cornwallis Road corridor. So it will be providing some high-level land use recommendations for that area as the town also looks to extend our extraterritorial jurisdiction out that way. So again, both those plans are now funded, and we expect those to kick off here probably in the next month or so. And both will be complete sometime between about January and March of next year. Also coming up, we will be presenting to y'all either your July or most likely your August meeting at this point. To the planning board, we will have our pedestrian plan. That plan is wrapping up. We expect to get final comments from NCDOT any day now. And once we do, we will schedule our final pedestrian plan steering committee meeting. And then following that, we will be bringing it to the planning board and then ultimately to the town council for adoption. That plan is something that the town has been working on for well over a year at this point. So we're excited to finally get that one moving across the finish line. And with that, otherwise, development continues to come in and be busy. We're staying very busy in our department. We do have a number of projects working their way through the process now. So coming up over the next few months, the planning board will be busy, not only with this project, but also with reviewing several developments that'll be coming your way here over the next few months. And I cannot think of anything else to burn your time now, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have while we're waiting for our consultant.
Perfect time.
Oh, and sure enough, here he is.
Sorry, I ran into this late.
Sir. Thank you. My apologies to the committee. You guys stay in the traffic here. I tell you, it's crazy.
Mike is just a prop, it's not working. It's not.
Okay. Continue to try to use this?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, very good. Mr. Chair, committee members, hi, I'm Chad. Sorry I'm late. Thanks for being here. Let's jump in, shall we? I'm principal of Code Right Planners, and it's my pleasure to be here tonight to talk with you guys about Codified Clayton and the diagnosis report that we've recently prepared. This is our second meeting. We've got about 7 or 8 of these to do. So our last meeting was a project introduction. That was back on May 23rd. Tonight's meeting is about the diagnosis report, okay? So the diagnosis report, just forward, okay. Diagnosis report is really a framework to enable us to talk about some of the recommendations that we're suggesting be made to the UDC. So before we talk about the diagnosis itself, I'd just like to give you a quick reminder of the project's goals. We'll talk generally about what the diagnosis is and its purpose. We'll probably cover in some detail the 7 key themes for improvement, the recommendations that we're suggesting be considered. I'll talk a little bit about the UDC review table, tomorrow's public forum, and then the next steps for the project. As always, if you have any questions, comments, please shout out. I'm happy to stop and take questions whenever you'd like. So these are the project goals. They're developed based on the information in the town's RFQ, discussions that we've had with staff and stakeholders, review of the current policy guidance, and input from this committee. So there are 7 project goals. Some of these I hope will look a little bit familiar to you. Obviously, making the code more user-friendly, more predictable, easier for staff to administer, easier for applicants to understand, easier for boards and commissions to use. Our second goal, implementing the 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan. Obviously, this is the vision for the future. The UDC is the primary tool that the town will use to implement this plan. Raising the bar generally in terms of design quality, development quality. Very, very important part of the project, and one that we'll spend a great deal of time talking about in the coming days and weeks. Accommodating a wider range of housing options, a very timely issue. Everybody is familiar with the housing crisis that we're experiencing here in North Carolina, and it's rather acute here in the Triangle. So some options for Clayton to navigate those kinds of problems successfully. Fostering downtown development and redevelopment. Your downtown is a beautiful, beautiful place. It's got a lot of character, it's got a lot of charm. How do we make sure that downtown stays that way or even gets better? That we accommodate development, that we encourage redevelopment, but that we don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. Very, very important thing for us to focus on. And then finally, just protecting community character generally, and property values in particular, okay? If anyone on the committee has any thoughts or suggestions about revisions to these goals, we would love to hear those. This is something that we can revisit, as we go forward with the project. You will see me every time go back and refer to these goals because they're really the touchstone for us as we're moving forward. And I'll talk a lot about how this particular proposal or that particular code section directly supports one or more of the project goals. So these are important, and if you have some thoughts, if there's something missing, or if you think that it's misworded, or you've got some suggestions about some other sort of change, please feel free to share that information. Very much want to hear from you about that. If nobody has any suggestions, please.
But how should we share those suggestions? Well, I've gotten several things, but I don't want to take up the majority of time here, and then I'm getting very into the weeds. But besides Marty, Jim, I do a lot of development downtown, so I'm actually facing issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that not everybody in the community necessarily want to get down into the weeds. So is this something that we need to send an email out, include the committee members, but focus it towards you, or how should we?
Great question. Generally speaking, going forward and always, you should always include staff as your primary contact person, and they'll forward that information on to me, and email is absolutely perfect. That's a perfect way to go. If for some reason you'd like to have a phone conversation, that's another thing that can be done as long as we keep staff in the loop and they're involved. It's a fantastic way for us to interact. Worry not in that there's plenty of time to modify these project goals. There's plenty of opportunity for us to make some further tweaks to this as we move forward through the project, and the next 2 weeks are an ideal time frame to do that. So that's what I would encourage you to do. If what you have is significant, or there's a lot of material or a lot of detail, then email that to staff, and let's review that, and then if necessary, we'll have a phone call. And we can even open that up and have it be a conference call for anybody who wishes to participate. That would be absolutely fine too.
Likewise, I've annotated and notated this entire thing with, objections and suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that as in true essence of a steering committee, that would be that it wouldn't be an email. When are we going to have an opportunity to kind of get the essence of this as a community? I'm not sure that an email is sufficient, and I have requests for data,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even studies that would make a better informed decision. And maybe they've already been done and I don't know it, but it hasn't been in the package we have now.
Right.
So, at what point, other than public comment, as a member of the community, are those things going to be taken into consideration? In true essence, the steering committee, it isn't that we hear a presentation and then we get a revision back and forth, where a steering committee we have our hand on the wheel.
Please.
It seems to me that, as Mr. Wilson said, he and several of the others are on the development side of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be against us to have that side go to you an email and have you send everybody back something on what you thought was the whole idea of steering committee like you just said, for the steering committee to bounce that back and forth and get, develop their ideas and down ideas and whatever like that.
Sure. Okay, so I'm gonna back up for a second, okay? This is a draft. This is a set of ideas and concepts for us to start talking about. We have at least 8 more meetings to go. At least 8. It sounds like maybe we'll have more, and that's certainly fine with me. I think having that discussion is important, and that's something that I'm committed to. These ideas were put down for you to respond to and think about. And as we continue to move through the process, we'll get more refined and tighter and more clear. And some things will carry forward, and some things will drop off and say, you know, that's not anything that we're interested in. And frankly, some things we might go in an entirely different direction. That's not unheard of either. And so this process is one where we're going from the broad to the narrow. Now, you know, if the committee feels like you want to go back and talk in more detail about what's in this diagnosis report, that's absolutely fine. That's something that we need to work with staff on in terms of, you know, the scheduling, the availability, etc. As far as my interest or my availability, that's absolutely fine. We can meet this to death, y'all. I'm not kidding, because this is what I do for a living. I love it. I can talk for hours about this. But I would suggest to you that let's move through this. Let's talk about it. Flag those things that you think need to be flagged. If there's additional information that you need, please reach out to staff, reach out to me, try to get that information. But I would encourage you to move forward with the spirit of this is a discussion, it is iterative, we are collecting information, we're not making any decisions, this is a draft, and let us move through that process without fear that you're going to wind up in 6 months with a written document that you're going to have to live with, because that is not going to happen. That is not the way that we're headed. We're not even going to start drafting this thing until next year. So, you know, we have a lot of work before us, a lot of discussion. So I want to encourage you to you know, be involved, stay involved, and worry not that, you know, we're going to take one particular perspective, or that, you know, we saw a couple people nod their heads, so we're off and down the road, because that's not what this is about. And I do think, you know, if this committee wants to meet again on some of this material, that's absolutely fine. This will grow into what's called an annotated outline. It's an outline. It's not the code. It's not intended to be the code. It's the further sort of evolution of some of these ideas. And again, you know, some of this isn't going to happen. Some of it's just not going to get carried forward. These are just ideas to get you thinking, and frankly, to get your reaction to things. Because some of this stuff is a little bit out there. I'll be the first to admit that. And some of that's done intentionally, and some of it just might be a bit of a surprise for you. So, you know, I encourage you to let the process work, to trust that, you know, there's nothing that you don't have. You guys got this. I got this. Your staff has got this. We're not going to shove this down your throat, and we're not going to move down the road in opposite when there's members of the committee in opposition. You guys are a sounding board. You're here to give us your first blush reactions. The majority of you are members of a planning board who are going to have your complete and utter opportunity to do a line-by-line review of this document when that part of the process takes place. I hope that you'll be comfortable enough that you don't have to do that. But if you do, well, you'll have that opportunity. Y'all are the brain trust for us, and we're looking to you to sort of say, that's an interesting idea. I like that. Or, boy, Chad, that's a terrible idea. That's not right for us. And you know, we'll toss it, and we'll just move on down the road. Okay?
So not to simplify this at all, but just, is it any, like, I want to be in the weeds. Like, to me, that's what we're here for, right? So instead of taking it offline, this is just my 2 cents. I'm probably in the learning end of things here. So I'm the newer part of all this. This is learning for me, but to take it offline and throw it at an email and then bring it back and then try to regroup that and explain it all to us, what took place off in the email. Is there any way we can just not to simplify it, but page by page, line by line. Isn't that what we're here for, is to kind of take through it step by step and then talk through it, even if it takes us all evening for one page or a half a page to dig into that and figure it out?
I guess
Show of
what,
hands,
I
how
think,
many folks have done this before? 1, 2.
well, I've done strategic planning before for,
So, I mean, we have about a 2-year window to do this project. Complicated development codes, they can take 5 years. They can take 7 years. I'm pretty sure that nobody around this table wants to spend the next 7 years working on this code, and I'm quite sure that, well, I don't know, I think,
I think we're belaboring a point that
Yeah.
could be very quickly and succinctly answered.
Yeah.
I think that there's been 4 people at the table just saying, what is the method that, besides email, that we can provide feedback and deliberation of the ideas? That's the only question.
Sure. So as far as the deliberation goes, we'll talk to staff about that and we'll see how we can integrate additional meetings in here. Maybe those will be virtual meetings, maybe there'll be meetings with people who are just interested, and there won't be committee of the whole meetings. I think that's a question for staff to think about.
There's also a chance that sitting with the technicals, see, there's not a lot of people in here who have done this before. It may be that start now, first things we see, and personally, there may be a couple things on there I can look at and say, that looks good. How's that going?
Going to work.
How are we gonna do that? That's the kind of thing that I'll think about, where somebody who has been through this, either with this or with something else, would say, okay, well, we can ignore that for right now, and we'll cover that on down the road. That's the kind of stuff I see when I look at it. I've never seen it.
Right. Please.
So taking this from the theoretical to the practical, we were handed a document to read and review. Assuming we all did so, we all walked away with some comments, some questions, concerns, any number of things. What's the process to go through that document and obtain everybody's reactions to that document so that the time we just spent is productive, and not only productive from the standpoint of sharing what we thought, but hearing what everybody else thought in terms of moving us forward. So I think that's what I'm getting a sense from everybody, whether it's James at a very detailed level from a developer's perspective to Lisa, who's trying to get her hands around this for the first time. So, and everybody in between.
So again, the question is, what is the process going to be where we discuss this diagram, this document, and break this down and talk about each and every one of these individual things? Okay, and the answer to that question is, I have to talk to staff and see where they want to go with this. Okay, there's a set amount of time, there's a set budget. We can use that time and that money in whatever way that you and the staff think is appropriate. Now, I would suggest to you that this is an initial set of concepts and ideas. Not necessarily what's going to be the exact black letter law of your new UDO. Not necessarily exhaustive of everything that's going to be in there. These are some concepts based on the adopted policy guidance that's in your plans. Will all of this make it through the filter? I doubt it. Will there be some things that do make it through the filter that are not in this document? Very likely. What are those things going to be? Well, it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of discussion for us to do that. It sounds to me like you guys want to have some more discussion. Let me talk to staff, because I haven't had a chance to talk to staff about how we go forward with that request, how we best facilitate having further discussion. Our intention was to bring to you an annotated outline, which again is not the code, but capitalizes on some of the things that you see in this document, those things that everybody sort of shakes their head and says, yeah, that sounds good. Some of those things you guys aren't going to go for, and those won't be in the annotated outline, and we would continue down the process. It's never been our intention, not now, not ever, to shove this down your throat or give you a bunch of stuff that you don't know what is or not talk about. That's never the intention. the idea here is we've got 700 pages of material that we've got to work through. Some of this stuff is going to be fairly easy. Some of it's brand new. Some of it's entirely new concepts that aren't, utilized in Clayton right now. Now, we're not going to do all that in one night. We're not going to do all that in 1 year. So trust that we understand that you guys want to talk about it and that you want to have these meetings, and let's find a way to do that on time and on budget, and so that you're happy with the end of the process. And I would say to you, let's get through this project. Let me talk to staff and let's circle back to you about how we talk about these ideas. Okay? I would ask that you put your trust in your staff, that we've thought about this. And at least let me get through the slides before you decide that the process is all wrong. Okay? Staff? Okay. This report, it's a framework, okay? It attempts to organize some of the thoughts, and we've organized those into 7 sort of themes for improvement. Those themes are based on the implementation options for the policies that the town has adopted. We spent some time going through the current UDC, looking at the provisions that were in there. And we summarized the stakeholder input that we've received thus far. Okay, so it forms the kernel of this document. And essentially, these themes are organized into groups. One thing I'll mention to you is that inside the diagnosis report itself, we only talk about the growth plan. There are 7 pieces of adopted policy guidance in place that refer to land use in Clayton. The complete compendium of all of that review is on the webpage, www.codifyclayton.com, under a tab called Documents, in a file called Codify Clayton Policy Guidance Review. So that's definitely something that if you're looking for some more background about where particular recommendations came from, or some more detail on where did this thing come from, and you're not seeing it in the comp plan, please look in this other document, because it includes some of the policy guidance that is there, but frankly we did not include in the diagnosis for sake of brevity. Okay? 7 key themes for improvement. This image is taken from page 2 of the report. We talk about each of these recommendations or the themes in some detail, and then I'll stop and ask the questions if you have any. I'll highlight most but not all of the recommendations, and we can absolutely discuss each and every one of these as much as you want, whether that's tonight or whether that's in a subsequent meeting. And I'll mention again, this is a draft. We do expect to make some revisions to this as we go along. This was just to get us started. So, key theme 1 is making the regulations more user-friendly. These recommendations relate not to substance, not to the substantive law in the document, but rather how it's organized, how the information in the document is organized. So, some examples of that would be alphabetic chapter names, alphabetic section names, so that when you've got the paper version of the document in front of you, you're able to flip through the pages and find the information you're looking for fairly simply. Okay? On the digital version, there'll be a breadcrumb menu, and you can just jump around the digital version with no problem at all. But for those who use paper, like staff or myself, having this alphabetical sequence is very helpful. We're talking about a new page layout, a greater use of color, different font styles, different indentation system, new numbering system, dynamic cross-references, headers and footers, and lots of other features like you see on pages 7, 8, and 9 of the document. All of this stuff is focused on making the document easier to use. The current UDC has a lot of prose in it, where you might have a paragraph that includes 6 or 7 sentences, and sometimes it takes time to unwind those sentences. the new UDC would be numbered statements instead of paragraph, okay? More illustrations. I would expect that you would see 600, 700, maybe 800 illustrations in this document. So this is very much focused on imagery and example, not so much on text, though text is very important. Where there is text, we try to use summary tables as much as possible. Your current UDC has summary tables in it. It's a very efficient way to contain information and help people move through the document. Clear, measurable criteria, and the emphasis being on the word measurable. There are some decision-making processes, like rezonings, that are fairly nebulous and legislative in nature. And they're generally not fettered, not bound to criteria. Everything else should be measurable. You as decision makers, or staff as decision makers on the approval processes that they handle, should be able to measure the outcome or measure the application's consistency or appropriateness or relationship to the decision-making criteria. Finally, a procedures manual or applications or some other kind of tool to be developed at the end of the process, again, to assist applicants in preparation of material to submit to the town. So that might be, like I said, a standalone manual, it might be new application forms, it might be something that goes with the town's digital permitting system. But ultimately, the idea here is let's capture those things that are not black letter law in the UDC or the UDO that are still helpful for an applicant to have when they're trying to prepare and submit an application. Okay, so that's the key theme one stuff, pretty simple stuff, pretty important in terms of the layout of the document and where it goes. Pretty important in terms of how it's used, but not necessarily that substantive in nature. Does anybody have any questions about that kind of thing? Any ideas or thoughts about your experience with the current code and what should be improved based on that? So, again, not substantively, but sort of the objective and the layout and that kind of thing.
I loved all the visual examples that were included in there. I thought that was a big improvement.
Okay, great. You should expect that. Not every single section of your new document is going to look that graphically intensive, but many will. Wherever possible, it will look like that and not like a typed page. Wherever we can do that.
And I'm like Andrea, to me, this is kind of like just modernizing our code, because any code you pick up now kind of looks that way. Mm-hmm. And the graphics go a long way in helping the user to understand what the code's trying to say. So this is good. It's what we need.
Good. I'm glad that you're happy about that. We're very excited about that. The preparation of the graphics and the inclusion of the illustrations and the user-friendliness stuff gives a lot of joy because it makes the document more fun to read and more enjoyable to work with. And frankly, easier. Other comments? Key theme 2 is implementing the town's adopted policy guidance. I mentioned before there's 7 different documents that are out there and more coming. The town is working on the downtown master plan, redoing that. The town is working on a small area plan for the 42 area. So there is policy guidance that is happening and being prepared concurrently with this. And we will be making sure to implement those new pieces of policy guidance when they come online. But for now, let's focus on what's at hand, which is the policy guidance we have. First and foremost, implementing the future land use map. The 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan sets down in it the future land use map, and that's pictured there on the screen. This is the graphic representation of the future based on the adopted comprehensive plan that's in place. It identifies a range of land use classifications. I know you guys know this stuff. The comprehensive plan attempts to assign some use types, In some cases, some densities, though we probably need a little bit more clarity about that as we go forward. But this is what I want to be when I grow up picture for the town's planning jurisdiction. And implementing this and revising the zoning ordinance so that it is in closer alignment with this is one of the most important things that we'll be doing. I would expect to see a variety of new zoning districts. I would expect to see dimensional changes, density changes, intensity change provisions associated with recommendations that are in the comprehensive plan. Okay? And that is set down in part 2 of the diagnosis, those key elements that would include some change. Mixed-use employment centers are certainly an important part of the plan. These areas in blue on the map that are employment generating first and foremost, but mixed use as well. In fact, mixed use is a theme that you'll see us weave through almost everything. Mixed use generally should be the path of least resistance for appropriate areas, like downtown, like the employment centers, like intersection areas, etc. More mobility alternatives. Not so much the comprehensive plan, but you have a wide slate of other policy guidance, a comprehensive transportation plan, a PED plan, a bike plan, a greenway or a recreation plan that spends a lot of time contemplating mobility alternatives, how to get from point A to B in ways other than in a car. Integrating that, bringing that kind of stuff together into an integrated whole through a set of comprehensive pedestrian facility standards instead of sidewalk standards, side path standards, greenway standards, multi-use path standards, taking a sort of coming up, if you will, to 30,000 feet, rethinking this and then bringing it back in a more sort of integrated way. More employment uses generally. One of the reasons why I was late was that half of North Carolina is trying to make its way home from where they work. So creating some employment uses here in town so that people don't have to drive to the other side of the triangle is an important part of the policy guidance. Protecting downtown character. Everybody is committed and devoted to making sure that downtown Clayton remains a quote-unquote place, a place where people want to be. So that means more development, right? And how do we establish that more development in ways that fit with what's on the ground today, that don't result in a downtown that's not a nice place to be, that are consistent with what the community is looking for in terms of downtown scale, downtown uses, downtown vibrancy. More parks and greenways. This came loud and clear in a variety of different ways, and there are some significant challenges with doing that particular kind of thing, particularly in built areas like the downtown. New development is often the primary driver for new parks and new greenways because new development pays for it. In existing areas, it's more of a challenge to accommodate these kinds of features. In general, generally speaking, it is the community, you and your colleagues, your neighbors, who pay for parks and greenway features in established areas. So we have to thread the needle here. We can't just rely on development, but we have to recognize that development is not going to fund the links and connections that we're going to need to make sure that our existing built area is part of the town. So that's something to think about. You'll see a handful of different approaches where we treat parks and greenways slightly differently based on whether you're a, quote, greenfield site or you're a site that's got an existing building and is being redeveloped, okay? And again, more policy guidance on the webpage. So there are additional provisions in there. Does anybody have any reaction to the policy guidance that's identified on the slide? Please.
I have a question, and perhaps this is denoted somewhere that I'm unaware, but what definition of downtown character are we relying upon, and where is that being gained?
My anticipation is that the revised downtown master plan will set down the boundaries for downtown and will identify the downtown character. So I don't know the answer to that. All I have to work with today is the downtown master plan that's in place, as supplemented by the comprehensive plan. But I do understand that the town is working on an updated downtown master plan that will likely anticipate different boundaries, will likely anticipate a new set of standards, will likely move away from how it's currently configured and into something more like a single downtown district that's got a handful of sub-districts. I don't know what that will be yet.
I'm less concerned with the boundaries as I am. I think that a lot of what's contained in this number 2 in particular, adopted, that we're integrating what already exists. The character of downtown is really central to a lot of this work that we're doing. I think it would be helpful to have a textbook definition of what we are defining as downtown character, because when we start talking about parks and greenways, when we start talking about, arts and culture, when we start talking about all of this, I mean, it can vary quite vastly from an urban area to a small town to a big city or whatever. I think that we need to define what our character of our downtown is so that we have a target to hit, and that we keep that central to our thoughts. This is helping us to meet our goal of what we want our town to represent.
I agree with you 100%. It's a great suggestion. Spending time either in this revised downtown master plan or the new development ordinance or both, indicating the purpose of these downtown standards is to support downtown character. Downtown character is what it is.
Right. Think about Apex. You can pretty much sum up their downtown character in a few sentences just by being there and getting a feel for what they're shooting for. Chapel Hill the same way. Downtown Raleigh the same way. You can say what their character of downtown is, and I have an idea, living here for the last 17 years, what our character is, but I need to know that what I'm shooting for and my suggestions is what we wish to do as a town.
You got to do more, because like Chapel Hill, it's very different than it did 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And did they, and so when they made their plan, what did they have in mind, and did they meet those goals?
And I feel like I'm visionary, because I think that Main Street could eventually go from Charlotte Road all the way to Highway 70.
But what do we want that to look like?
And then, because there's so much redevelopment opportunity, some of these, brick 1960 brick ranches will come down and there'll be a 3-story building, should it be a 4-story building? Should it be, one of the things that's always, you have a 3-story building, you can have front-end,
You're seeing it from a developer standpoint, and I'm seeing it from a resident standpoint, but yes.
But if you say we want to get, the highest bang for our tax buck in downtown, and most people live in downtown, so we can have more opportunities downtown for retail and restaurants, so we don't have to get that density. So, but what does it mean? Because right now it's 3-story, we got a cap on it, we don't take it over, 35, 40 feet, something like that. And, so I understand exactly where you're coming from, but this is.
I think we have different visions of what we want for downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think polar opposites, quite frankly. Chapel Hill is, you're not going to see a roadway sign and a 16-story building there. I'm much more of a, but that's my thing. It's not my way or your way. It's what is our North Star? What are we shooting for as a town? Because if it is what you say, if it is a 16-story high-rise so that we can maximize development, we look like downtown Raleigh, that's a far different thing than downtown Chapel Hill, where they don't have 16-story buildings.
Yeah, but they have 4 or 5-story buildings.
Okay, yeah, but I'm saying these are two very different ideas of downtown character,
Well,
right? And that's what I'm
at
saying.
some point, if you start talking about high-rise, those things, then you get the, fire department can only go up a certain, you got all these things. But you're looking
What
at
can we afford to have as our character?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you're looking at it both ways, though. You're looking at it as resident, you're looking at it as a developer, but we're all residents, and I run a business in this town, and so whatever we come up with has got to appeal to residents and to business owners, and I think you're right. I do think that the first problem is sometimes we define downtown as it starts here and it ends here, and that's where it's always going to be. And right now, the downtown does not extend in either direction any further than it did when James and I were born here. identically
I
the
can walk
same,
it.
same
I do,
footprint. Yeah,
regularly.
it's the same footprint it's always been. So I don't see why it can't go all the way to Shopwell. It can. Now, there's people who live between here and there who might not want downtown.
There's a lot of underdevelopment there.
Right.
Yeah,
But I think we have to look at what does downtown, but I also think when you look at a downtown area, I used to run a business in this town 30 years ago that was not downtown, it was on 70. And as someone and I was on the Downtown Development Association then, and I was very conflicted in this 1988, more than 30 years ago. I was very conflicted then because we were doing a lot to promote downtown while I ran a business that was not downtown. And I often felt as a business owner in this town who ran a business that was not downtown, there was a lot of focus on downtown when there's a lot of other businesses that are just as interested in having people be happy to go to their business on Highway 70 or 42 or wherever it happens to be. So I don't ever want us to get so obsessed with downtown that we forget that Clayton is more than just Main Street.
and that is my point. It's not, but my point isn't that, I don't care if it runs all the way to Raleigh, quite frankly. I just want to know, what do we want to characterize? Right, that's what characters the root of. What do we want our town to be characteristic of? And let's make sure that we are always keeping that in mind. Let's get that definition of what we want our town to be, and then I think all of the rest of these pieces easily fall into place, and we find a lot more common ground.
Well, I think that's the purpose of the whole thing here, because one minor change or something that appears minor right now can drastically change what the character is. And Apex, I know what the character of Apex is, but I also know that 20 years ago, Apex was a ghost town down there.
Absolutely. And did they take
Changed
their
drastically.
character, and did it stray from what they wanted? And that's what I said. That's why I'm saying maybe it exists somewhere that we have defined our character, but I really think that needs to be written down, and that's probably a first point of agreement, is to decide, okay, this is what it is, and then as we move forward, do all of those things meet those goals, right? Our mission statement, if you will.
But I also, this doesn't have to be about me, but I'm just telling you, I also run a business in Apex. And so where we moved our business from one place in Apex to another place in Apex, because of the character of downtown and because of their codes in downtown, it forced us, based on what I manage funeral homes. So based on where our funeral home was going to be in Apex, we could not move where I wanted to move because it would alter their idea of what that area was supposed to look like. So we put a funeral home a little different spot than we had planned to put it. It's fine. But as a person running a business there, I like the fact that they had a very set, even though it went against what I was trying to do, I still like the fact that they had a plan. A good plan today is better than a great plan next year. And I think any plan is better than no plan, which is what we're trying to achieve.
My question then becomes, sort of based off of what you're saying, is how much of a say do we as the steering committee have in the definitions that we're working with? Like, let's say that there is a definition put forward by staff or whoever in the downtown plan that they're working on, and we really disagree with what they define as character, right? Let's say that we really disagree with what our North Star should be. Do we have the opportunity to then say, well, actually, this is sort of what we think we should be shooting for in that case? Like, do we have the ability to change that?
So we look at the existing downtown plan, or what for the new downtown, the existing downtown plan. And I'm not advocating 16-floor building, I'm just saying that Chapel Hill, new Chapel Hill looks way different than old Chapel Hill.
Oh, absolutely, I
Whereas
agree.
Apex, new Apex looks very different, very similar to old Apex.
I lived in
So it's
Cary
two
in the early
completely
90s.
different.
Yeah, it's far different today than what it was in the early 90s when I lived in Cary. Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. But I'm not saying what the answer should be. I'm just saying that I do think we need something to focus on and do all of these other pieces fit into it. And I'm sure it exists somewhere, this idea of what our downtown character is. But
So it's a great discussion, and Jody, your point is well taken. There is a big difference, a bright line, between a plan and a code. Plan is visionary. A plan looks to the future and says, this is what we want to be. This is our objective, this is our vision, this is our goal. Code is a set of laws that says, these are the rules for how we're going to create that vision, that character, that desire that we have for the future. And so I understand that it might seem like I'm picking nits or arguing about semantics, but there is a very big difference between a plan and a code. And you guys are working on the code, not the plan. I think if you have a lot of feelings and thoughts and input to share with respect to what happens with the vision for downtown, then you absolutely need to be involved in the downtown master planning portion of what's going on there, because that's going to inform what we do on the code. Now, we're going to, one more thing, and then I'll let you guys ask questions, but I just want to be sure that you know that we're not going to be moving forward with a lot of material for downtown until the downtown master plan update is complete.
That was my question.
Because we simply don't know yet what the community wants to do in terms of its, vision for downtown, or its character, or where it should be, or what, whether they should be 16-story buildings or 4-story buildings. We just don't know the answer to that yet. It is a little unique to be undertaking a code while that's going on, but that's the situation that we're in, and so we're going to be able to work with that. And I just want to, put any concerns that you might have to rest, that, we're just going to move forward without that guidance, because that's not going to happen. We are going to take the time. So I just wanted to be sure that everybody was cool with that. Please.
So what I'm hearing is we're the means to the end. These other documents are the end, and they're defining what that end is, and we're going to define the means to get to that end. If that's correct, my concern is, and I had that concern before we got to this discussion, is we have a whole host of documents: downtown master plan, old one, new one coming, comprehensive use plan. There's a pedestrian plan. There's all these things. I believe it came up at a recent town council meeting where there was a concern that there's so many of these things. Who's looking to ensure there's no conflicts built into those things? Is there consistency in that vision, or are we setting microscopic visions for each little piece, which may create inconsistencies? So I think it's incumbent for this group to do a good job, that we have a clear sense of what that vision is, both at the macro level in terms of across the town, and then at the smaller micro level for the different components of the town, downtown, 70, gateways, all those things. I just want to be sure, if we're writing the rules on how to get there, that we know where the hell we're going.
Thank you, that's exactly what I was saying. Yeah,
It's very
we have to
percent-
know what the mission and the vision of the county is before we can make these decisions.
Yeah, I was feeling the same way, because it sounded to me what you were saying is, you'd be setting this plan, and specific service. Yeah, the plan would be being set on that way. You'd be planning, you'd be setting the specific.
Correct.
We don't know what the plan is.
No,
How can we set the specifics?
we can't. We have to wait for the plan to catch up to us. So we're going to work on the parts of the code that aren't the downtown until that work gets done.
Right, but how do we come back to the inconsistencies? Who's looking to make sure that all these things are integrated, so that transportation plan fits the comprehensive use plan, fits the downtown plan, that there's connectivity and interoperability between those plans?
Well, that'd be me, that'd be your staff, and that'd be you. And one of the first things that you guys may see along that lines is the preparation of a diagnosis that sets down the policy guidance that we're attempting to implement, which is what you have in front of you. So hopefully we've done some work, and you agree that we have cast the net broadly, that we have picked up inconsistencies, that those are identified, that we are coming forward with a set of suggestions that will work. And there's one more thing I want to mention to you. And just because it's in the plan doesn't mean that we need to implement it, okay? There might be extenuating circumstances why it's not yet time to implement that particular piece of policy guidance. I'll give you an example. Your comprehensive plan talks about maybe creating a historic district. There's a lot of moving parts that go into that. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I'm not sure that's envisioned for now. I'm quite certain the timing doesn't allow us to conduct the multi-year process to work with the people who own property in downtown to create a historic district in the downtown. Now, that's an example of a piece of policy guidance that for practical purposes, we probably won't get to in this effort. And there's likely going to be others for a variety of reasons. The opportunity costs of doing it. It's inconsistent with something else that we think is a better idea. So I wanted to be sure that you didn't feel like I must check every single box of every single plan, and if I don't, I haven't done my job. Think about it in a slightly more holistic way. We're looking for patterns. We're looking for things that are good for the community. We want to take those. We want to turn them into implementation. There may be some policies that we run across that frankly we're not comfortable with, or that we don't know how to implement, or that we don't have the tools yet to implement. So I just wanted to be sure that you knew that this isn't like a shopping list that we have to check off every single thing, or we can't leave the store, because that's not what it is. We're working to get as much of this done as we can in the time limit that we have, with the money that we have, with the staff that we have, with the conditions that we're faced with.
The reference you made to the historic, 3 or so years ago, town council was asked to approve a large house that had to be taken down. And it was one of the big houses on the side of the block. And the whole neighborhood came in to the meetings and was complaining about the fact that this is an old neighborhood, we don't want new houses, it's modern looking houses, we don't want this, we don't want that, we don't want this. And it came up in that Clayton did not have a historic.
You have a national register district. You don't have a local district, and that's what I'm talking about.
We do have.
You have a national register district.
Within a year, we got street signs up saying this is historic.
A national district.
Okay. We didn't
What's the
have that.
difference? Right. And that's something that you can do, absolutely.
Yeah. So
But that doesn't carry any force of law like a local historic district does.
it looks good on sign.
It's certainly, and they're good things to have. I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's a bad idea. I think it's great. But the notion that a local historic district with a certificate of appropriateness and a historic preservation commission and all of the things that come with that, including you can't paint your door until you've gotten a certificate of approval of appropriateness, that's stuff that takes time to prepare. More time than we have, more money than we have. So that's a particular set of recommendations inside your current comprehensive plan that I'm not sure we're going to get to with this effort. That's not to say you should give up on it or that you shouldn't pursue it, but rather with this set of changes to your Unified Development Ordinance, that fruit is higher up the tree than the ladder that we have before us. If it's something that's really important, then we need to get a bigger ladder. And that means more money and more time. Did you have a question?
I totally understand this. I just want to make sure that I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just to have an idea. We're not establishing, from the 2045 growth plan, I think we had a lot of public comment and a lot of the focus was we want to keep Clayton, with that small town feel. So I can assume that that's to the North Star portion of, that's kind of the character of what we want to keep. How much of this UDC is going to impact, I'm assuming it's going to have impact. So I agree with the fact that we kind of have to have an idea of what we're looking to characterize the town as before we finalize any kind of choices and make some decisions or even ask questions or whatever based on, where we want to go with it. And it may have an impact or it may change. something as long, we're not going for the 16-story building, we're going for a little bit more historic character.
Right.
So I think it's nice to know that. I think that's what we're just trying to establish, correct me if I'm wrong, just trying to establish that, have an idea in our head so that when we go along this path for this budget and all the things that we only have so much time for, we can make a fair decision or thought process based on maybe that being the be-all, end-all goal, virtually. Is that
It's
an
a great
accurate
point.
statement?
The thought that flashed across my mind was this: does this committee feel like the comprehensive plan that you've got in place now properly characterizes the small town that Clayton wants to be? Do you have that information in tow? Or is that still an open question?
I think so. I think that that's kind of where we ended it at that point, but I think you have a deeper thought about that. I
I
can't
just
speak
want it
for
to be
you. but-
articulated so we have it in mind, that's all.
Agreed. Yeah.
That's the only thing I want. I don't want a hand in it. I don't want to join another committee. I just want it to be articulated and for us to have
So
that
we
on the
kinda have
table
an
so we
idea.
can look at it and say,
Yeah.
does this align? Box checked. That's
Yeah.
all.
I agree.
Yeah,
So-
it was a long answer to a short question.
And Chad, to maybe simplify that a little bit, we're talking about the comp plan that I think everybody is in agreement with. It's recently been approved. Members of that committee are in this room. I think we all like it. But when you start talking about a downtown master plan, a small area plan, those are drilling down on what Ms. Berry is really talking about, that vision. And the last thing we want to do is codify something that is in direct conflict with a plan that is either underway or recently approved. Because all that means is, further, text amendments and code changes that nobody wants to go through. And so, it does matter. It does matter. And as far as how once we start drilling down on downtown, we don't want to say, you can have 30 units per acre and, the master plan comes back and says, well, you can go 50 units. You know what I'm saying? We just don't want to develop any conflicts that are just almost, right in front of our face, So, I get it if we need to put a placeholder, and maybe that's what we do, but that's going to be difficult because we start creating new zoning districts like we know we're probably going to have. Well, obviously, there's going to be some that are downtown. It's going to be a little difficult, to put a placeholder on this and put a placeholder on this because it affects downtown. It's going to be difficult because we don't have that vision that we are asking for, and the council has directed to have a downtown master plan.
You're right, Marty. Our work is cut out for us, but it's not impossible. And there are some concepts, that we can begin to work with. The notion that we do want small town character. And I agree that, it's possible for us to go in and comb your documents and try to tease out small town means X in Clayton. I think that that's something that can be done. I wouldn't give that the weight of law. I think that's something that is kind of subjective, kind of different for different people. But I understand the desire to have that as a North Star, a guiding sort of principle for us. Certainly, there's parts of Clayton that aren't downtown that you still probably would like to be small town.
Sure.
So having some understanding about what that is, I think is something that we can do. To your point, and yes, we're just going to have to wait until we've got the policy guidance for those pieces that we don't yet have the policy guidance for. And that will make our work a little bit more challenging, but not impossible. And frankly, you guys will be ready to rumble. We will have dealt with enough issues that when it comes time to take on these complicated things like how do we zone downtown for what we want and for what not for what we don't want, you guys will be seasoned pros at how to do that. So in that regard, it's probably a good thing that heavy lifting is coming later in the process when we've gotten some of the easier stuff out of the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, as long as it all comes together, because council has, an idea of when this is due and, you know, a deliverable is ready, and I mean, we want to hit those schedules, and I know you're going to be held to those schedules. So, you know, as long as it comes together and we don't have conflicting documents is probably what we all want.
Okay. Outstanding discussion. Does anybody have anything else on key theme 2? Please.
Last thing, and then I'll shut up for a while. Here we're talking pretty high level, but in the
Yes.
document we were provided, we got down to things, and this speaks maybe perhaps to some of Jane's comments at the onset of the meeting, talking about impervious surface limitations, natural development of sites, those kinds of things. So there's a lot more detail here in this document.
Yes.
And my concern is we're talking high level here. How do we address from a process standpoint some of this detail so it isn't lost? I don't want to be 5 meetings down the road and you think we've approved something, we never had a discussion about it because we're talking about bullets up on a screen and not the details that were in the document we were asked to review.
Right, right. It sounds like you guys really want to provide some guidance and have some more discussion about the meat of the document, which I think we're going to try to figure out a way for us to do that. So so we're going to try to honor that request. I can't make any promises because I haven't had a chance to talk to staff about it. So we got to put our heads together and come up with something that we'll propose so that you guys feel like you've had ample opportunity to cover the level of detail. Yeah, I put a bunch of generalities up on the slide because I didn't anticipate spending, 15 or 18 hours on this presentation. I'm pretty sure you don't want to do that. So I'm at the high level, and we'll kind of get into the more details as we go. And I'm glad that you guys are interested in that. And we just have to figure out how can we do that given the time and the resources that we have. I'm not saying we're not going to do it. I'm saying we got to go figure out how we're going to do it.
Sure.
And I would add, you've got 3 council here tonight, so we're definitely listening intently, and it's, we knew and who we were bringing into this room that you guys were all going to have really good detailed thoughts. So now I think coming up with a mechanism of how we capture your detailed thoughts and how you get to respond to each other's thoughts is really not going to be that hard, and we can absolutely do it and still stay within our budget. And I just thinking about this slide here with the various plans, another thing to keep in mind is, for example, for the 2045 growth plan, we had this huge magical plan that addressed all these areas. Well, then in the end was kind of your targeted top items bullet list of things. So that's kind of how I envision us moving forward too, and I could be completely wrong, but when you're talking about many, many plans like this with lots and lots of details, yeah, it's gonna have to get condensed, and we're not all gonna get every little piece of it that we want, but I think what we can do through your comments, the stakeholder comments, trusting staff to kind of synthesize, let us all respond, I think we'll get it to that, okay, here's the meat of it, here's what we're acting on in this version of the UDC. So I'm really confident that we're gonna be able to get everybody's comments in a manner that doesn't put us over budget or timeline. We've got some ideas going about that.
Well said, thank you. Okay, so we'll sort through this, we'll come back and figure out a way that you guys can dig into the detail in a way that works for everybody. It sounds like we need to spend some time thinking about what are the plan priorities. And by we, I mean the royal we, us and you. What are the plan's priorities, right? Recognizing that, we've got 700 pieces of plan guidance to implement, and we have time and money to implement half, or maybe 30%. So what are the priorities going to be? Not taking that policy guidance off the table, we're just saying, this is, we've got a budget, we've got a schedule, we've got a project, we're going to have these goals, this is what we're going to do. Some things we aren't going to be able to accomplish yet. That's all. Yet. Not ever, just yet. Okay? Okay. Raising the bar for development, quality, and design. This is a theme that has been hit by numerous people who are elected officials, your staff, town administration, and frankly, many of the stakeholders have indicated that they would like to see higher, quote, higher quality development. And what does that mean? Thus far, at this point in the process, we're suggesting a variety of things that could be done to facilitate, quote, higher quality development. Is this everything? Probably not. Is this everything that this committee is going to want to have? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's some other things that you guys will think is important as well. But the notion of single-family design guidelines as a starting point to facilitate discussion about how single-family detached development, townhouses and duplexes should be designed going forward as part of new subdivisions. The state will not allow Clayton to have standards for single-family, townhouse, and duplex dwellings unless it's applied through a conditional zoning process, okay? So we have to have guidelines. We have some tools, we have some ideas about how to facilitate this within the law, but it's definitely one of the things that we want to incorporate, suggest, and explore with you guys. This idea of single-family design guidelines. If you follow them, you get a density bonus, okay? New design standards generally, and this would be for multifamily development, offices, retail, commercial, maybe light industrial, maybe not, mixed use, those kinds of developments. And these would be standards, not guidelines. These are requirements. Everybody has to do these things. These kinds of design standards focus on building orientation, exterior materials, wall articulation, windows, fenestration, entrance details, a variety of different things. That would be a suggestion for us to explore. I mentioned earlier, I highlighted this idea of an integrated set of pedestrian facilities. Where are sidewalks required? Where can a side path substitute for a sidewalk? Where can a multi-use trail be? Where should it be? How do we integrate greenways? Taking those 4 different kinds of pedestrian facilities, and instead of treating them as 4 different things, which your current plans do, we're trying to integrate them and bring them together and hopefully address inconsistencies and establish some standards that'll work for these different things, both at the macro level, how do I get across town on foot, and the micro level, here's this site in downtown, he is changing use, are we going to require him to spend $80,000 to put a sidewalk in? That kind of question is what needs to be anticipated by the UDO. How do we handle that situation? Is that going to be something that we ask that redeveloper to do, or is that something more appropriate for the community to pay for? The rules will address some of that too. Stormwater innovations. Incentives for low impact development, okay? Development that treats stormwater differently than put it all in a big hole in the ground or convey it to another big hole in the ground somewhere else, okay? So low impact development and some incentives for that. LID is very expensive, as many of the developers know. It can work well, but it's also incredibly expensive. And if it's so expensive that you don't get the development, then it's not a great idea to require it.
That's happening right now.
Understand.
Yes, it is.
Right now.
Understand. Likewise, accelerated stormwater planning requirements for resource conservation areas, okay? One of the things that's unique about Clayton is that you have taken your stormwater planning in-house, okay? You are now masters of your own destiny with respect to stormwater, and that means you can use the state model standards or you can use something else. And something else might be accelerated standards in your resource conservation areas, whether they're primary or secondary. No, I'm not going to go into a lot of details about that tonight, but I just want you to know that that's a marker for us, that you have some flexibility in how we do stormwater, and you can go above and beyond the state minimums if you choose to do that. There's a variety of reasons why you might. Another example, exit velocity standards. So the stormwater that does leave the site is leaving it at a velocity that's non-erosive, that's not going to negatively impact adjacent sites. some retention basin screening alternatives, some better standards for stormwater control measures. A variety of stormwater innovations are anticipated in terms of development quality. Exterior lighting. You guys have some standards. We could do a little better. Some foot candle limits at lot lines, particularly residential lot lines. Uniformity ratios for parking lot lighting so that all parts of the parking lot have a similar level of lighting so there's no dark corners. Glare control so that I don't see the source of illumination, I don't see the bulb. Recreational facility light controls. If anybody lives near an athletic facility, whether that's a school or a park, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Possibly even dark sky incentives, some incentives to encourage business owners to turn off their lights at night, except for when necessary for security purposes. So there's some possibilities for some dark sky incentives, things that we might want to include. That's an incentive. Modernizing open space. So we heard an awful lot from the stakeholders about open space, recreation, costs. There's a lot of feelings out there about open space. Frankly, there's a lot of feelings in your adopted policy guidance. We need more. We want more. Okay, that's cool. That's understandable. How do we do that in ways that creates recreational resources that people are going to use, that doesn't become cost prohibitive for a developer or cost prohibitive for the town to maintain? I have seen many communities that have private common open space set aside standards that the homeowners association is supposed to maintain and can't. And those spaces become derelict and people get angry, and then they come to the elected officials and they say, we want you to take them over. And the elected officials say, I'd really like to help you, but I don't want to raise taxes. So how do we avoid all of that and do this in a slightly smarter way? Fee in lieu is a great option. The recognition of urban open space, instead of just this notion of passive open space and active open space, how might open space be different in urban areas? And not just downtown, but other urban areas, like our employment centers or our major intersections, that kind of thing. And then finally, locational standards to promote connectivity so that I can get from park to park, or open space to open space, or greenway to greenway around town. How do I position those in sites so that we've got a maximum potential for connection? The street connectivity index, I won't spend a lot of time talking about that. That's basically a way for us, it's a little bit more of a modern way to build your street network without difficult to comply with maximum lengths or maximum numbers of homes on cul-de-sacs or limits on cul-de-sacs outright. There are a variety of ways for a street connectivity index to create a connected street network so people can move around without the more draconian, non-flexible limitations on block length and cul-de-sac limit. Gateway corridor overlay, you guys have a transportation or a thoroughfare corridor overlay now. Some of that material might get picked up and embedded as basically generally applicable standards to most forms of development. And that we replace that with a gateway corridor overlay that hinges on approval of individual small area plans over time, not all done at once, with focus on the unique attributes of these different character areas, okay? All right. Questions on raising the bar? We're going to spend more time on this than you want to, I promise. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about this issue and how we do that. Be a lot of time spent on this. I feel it coming with you guys.
You have people who are passionate about making this town great, so.
Hallelujah, hallelujah. Believe it or not, though I don't live here, I'm extremely passionate about you guys getting exactly what you want. We're gonna do it.
Chad, just real quick, that your street connectivity grid index, that in no way is like a block perimeter concept, great, because that is a disaster.
Doesn't work for you.
Doesn't work for City of Raleigh, and they have it in their Board of Adjustment. It's horrible. So thank you, I'm glad to hear that. Great.
Real quick, sorry,
I'm sorry.
I know you said you weren't gonna talk a lot about it, but the, street connectivity index, that's talking about connectivity in more than just like vehicular traffic, it's also like pedestrian and bike, and talking about how you can get around different places and all those different kind of things, correct?
We do anticipate focusing on connection of pedestrians via the pedestrian facility requirements, not necessarily the street connectivity index. So yes, but in a different place.
Okay.
It's a good question. Others? Development review process, predictable. Those who are developers in the room know, and I don't want to speak for you, but my guess is that, frankly, you don't care what the standards are, you just want to know what they are, and you want to know what the time frame is, right? If it's the standards, you meet the standards. If you're not ready to meet the standards, you can go somewhere else. I mean, let's just get right down to it. So we need to be very clear about what are the standards, how do I go through the process? And let's just take all of the guessing work and the games and all of that stuff and just set it aside. Identify the kinds of development that you want to have, make that the path of least resistance, and go forward. So we're going to attempt to do that. Okay? How do we do it? So the first thing that we need to do is every single procedure in your ordinance, and right now you have about, I think, 20 or so. By the time we're done, you'll probably have about 40 or so, maybe 35. Okay, 34. But everyone needs to have a purpose and intent. It needs to be very clear about what is the purpose of this provision, what is the intended outcome of this procedure, what does the development that comes through this process look like at the end, so that they know, so that they know, so that the people who live here know, so that the applicant knows. It shouldn't be a guessing game. We need way more pieces of clarity about what is subject to a set of standards and what is exempt from a set of standards. All of your procedures need to have very clear exemption clarity built into them. Uniform procedural language, you sort of have that now, which is good. The town went through a 160D update, you guys may remember, in 2021. There were a series of procedural changes that were made to your ordinance, and you're starting to move towards the direction of uniform procedural clarity, right? We have the same kinds of sections for each procedure. We have the same kinds of information in each of those sections. It might differ from procedure to procedure, but the structure is the same. Very, very helpful for a layperson to come in and navigate the ordinance. We need to clarify conflicts, okay? Most local government regulations say, in the case of a conflict, the most restrictive standard applies, okay? That's not what they do, all right? So when we buy stocks, they say, what? Buy low, sell high, right? Except nobody does that. It's the exact same way with clarifying conflict. I tender to you that, as a matter of fact, in most cases, the most restrictive standard doesn't apply, right? If I got a condition of approval, if I got a conditional rezoning, if I'm taking advantage of an incentive, if I got a variance, all of those instances are situations where the most restrictive standard may not apply. And where's some clarity on that? Missing procedures. We have things to add that you guys need to include. An administrative adjustment, an annexation, the building permit procedure, the certificate of occupancy procedure, determinations, development agreements, exempt and expedited subdivisions, fee in lieu, fence permits, floodplain, performance guarantees, stormwater, watershed, on and on. So there's several that need to be added to your ordinance, again, to make things easy to understand. Lots and lots of comments about the pre-application conference. A pre-application conference is a best practice. Your town does them now, and that is very good. And there are ways to improve upon the procedures that the town is already doing. We might suggest or explore the possibility of having all of the technical review committee present at pre-application conferences so that they take place during the TRC's regular meetings instead of on an appointment basis, so that everybody's at the table when the time comes. Lots of discussion about an exit memo, some sort of memorialization of what was said at the pre-application conference. None of it is binding. Why is it not binding? Because you haven't filed an application, but an exit memo nonetheless, so that that information is set down somewhere. It may be possible, it may be desirable to reduce some of the situations where a pre-application process is required. The way that it reads now, they're mandatory for most kinds of things, and it might be possible to soften that just a little bit so that the TRC has time to focus on the pre-application conferences that are of the most import, instead of the ones that, frankly, we maybe didn't need to have. Clarification on expiration and vesting rules. This is extremely complicated. Those of you who are detail-oriented will probably really enjoy the vesting portion of the document. This body of law is dense, and that's putting it nicely, but it's very, very important. Vesting protects an approval from changes in the rules. How long does that protection last? It's part of the vesting rules, okay? That needs to be clarified. And when does my approval expire? Reduce the over-reliance on special use permits, right? There's 85 uses in the town's use table. 44 of them require a special use permit in some form or fashion. 12 of them, you gotta have a special use permit to go anywhere in town. Now, some of that stuff's good, okay? Things like adult uses, I want that to be a special use permit, that makes sense. But maybe some other things shouldn't be special use permits. Like what? Like multifamily, like accessory dwelling units. Maybe there's some other uses out there that shouldn't be special use permits. And how do we make sure that the code has in it the use-specific standards and the criteria in place so that we can comfortably allow those uses without having to go through the difficult evidentiary hearing and conditional quasi-judicial process. How do we avoid that? Finally, clarifying the subdivision rules. This is the one section of your code that I would suggest actually went in a more complicated direction from the 160D provisions. And I look forward to talking with you guys about that in the coming days and weeks. From my standpoint, it's necessary for us to identify subdivisions that are exempt and provide a cursory review to somebody who wants that. We need to have a special standard for expedited subdivisions. They're to be treated differently than other kinds of subdivisions. Transfer plats or family subdivisions need to be treated differently. We should incorporate a conservation subdivision process. And I look forward to talking with you guys about what that is and how that might work. The current subdivision provisions, at least from my standpoint, would benefit from some more detail on construction drawings, utilities provisions, turnover of as-bills, things that are part and parcel of the development process that need to be a little bit more clear. They're not as fancy and showy as, our vision for downtown, but they're just as important to have in the regulation. So, those would be the predictable development review processes. There's lots and lots of this stuff, and I know it's not very interesting. It's very dry. It is also very, very important. Does anybody have any comments on this?
I like the more detailed purpose and intent statements. And one reason is just from my years on the planning board, I remember certain ordinances would come up or design standards. I don't actually know what they were, but I know they were kind of old and you weren't even really sure what the logic was. So I think that's nice to have because staff changes, councils change, boards change, and then you have the backstory of kind of what went into that logic there.
Right,
so.
indeed. You know who we write purpose and intent statements for? The judge. That's who. And we'll talk plenty about that when the time comes.
One thing that I noticed is I don't think that what we reviewed, or I reviewed since Thursday, that there was much emphasis put on our TJ and the fact that we're going to have DOT roads being built in our TJ. So, you know, we need to adopt a DOT road standard. I think it would be totally insane to require somebody in the ETJ where the town is not going to provide any maintenance on the road to put in curb and gutter and sidewalk whenever DOT aren't going to maintain those things.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you see, you know, neighborhoods that had stuff out before, you know, we should let those, especially if they're going to be lower density, they're not going to necessarily be connected with soil and water. And there's a huge area and a lot of acres that are in that category. So I think that's something that we really got to be cognizant of as we move forward.
And so, I mean, you flagged a couple of what I like to call public infrastructure provisions: roads, curbs, gutter, sidewalks. Are there others that you would class? I think the point you're making is we need to recognize or distinguish between these areas that are going to have more urban forms of infrastructure versus these areas that are frankly not going to have these kinds of urban infrastructure, right? And so that urban infrastructure in that context means streets, curb gutters, sidewalks. Are there others that you think?
One thing that I was a little concerned with also is like private road standards. You know, if you have 100 acres and somebody decides they want to develop that in 25-acre lots and they're taking 70 acres or 80 acres of it and you're having open space, you know, and they're developing 30 acres, you know, I think that just behind the gate, you know, why should the town try to say you got to have our standards? You know, we aren't maintaining it, we aren't installing it, and I think that there should be some leeway there.
Okay.
What do towns do? I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that's town right now that 30 years ago was the ETJ. It wasn't the town. So if somebody is building something in the ETJ or doing something in the ETJ, and we don't hold them to the town standard because the town's not going to look after it, and the state doesn't care, what happens in 10 years when that is the town?
But it's not necessarily going to be the town. The only way it's going to be the town is if it's annexed.
Well, I mean, but we got stuff, this happens all the time. I mean, this town's covers a lot more ground than it covered 30 years ago.
And it puts an unnecessary burden on the people who are living downtown to bear the tax burden for the new areas that was annexed that has a much lower population.
But the annex is only occurring at the developer's request. So then you have to apply, the rules for the town would be applied from the get-go.
Yeah, but that's my question. It's stuff, annexation happens at developer's request, but there's stuff that, you know, Amazon comes down here, and they're not coming because they're in Smithfield, but if a business like Amazon came down here between us and Garner and built something that didn't fall into Garner city limits, didn't fall into Clayton city limits, I got news for you, both Clayton and Garner is going to fight to have that in the city limits because we want the tax from that stuff. Can't forcibly annex, but they may ask, but then all of a sudden you got satellite annexation. So things happen in this town. I mean, we know there's stuff that's in the city limits now that wasn't in the city limits 30 years ago. There's people living there that never thought they'd be in the city limits, that are in the city limits. If they're not developed, if the ETJ is not held to the same standard as the town, then what happens when that becomes city limits? Now, all of a sudden, you got stuff that's in the town doesn't even come close to meeting the standards that the rest of the town has met. Then you can't go back and say, well, you're in town now, you got to do all this stuff.
I don't think the current state statutes on annexation allow the town to annex like that. The last annexation I'm aware of was in the late 80s, and it was of Teal Subdivision, which is about Highway 42 and 70 there, that old Amoco station, or whatever you want to call it Palace's Garage. You know, they were on town water and sewer and town annexed. That was the last forcible annexation. So if you're saying that I've got 100 acres, I'm going to extend water to it, I'm going to ask for annexation, they should meet the town standards. But if you are on Jack Road, or if you're on Big Pine Road, which is in the TJ, you know, and you're 2 miles away from sewer and water, and you're 2 miles away from the closest sidewalk, and you're gonna be an NCDOT street, I think it's unrealistic to ask.
Where does the city limits, you live in Barber Mill Road, where do city limits go in Barber Mill Road? I know that Howard's
Howard is a
is
satellite.
a satellite annexation. So does the city limits stop where it used to stop, just past Fifth and Home, and then, pick up at thing? Or?
Because you got Stone Brook is a donut kind of inside.
Right.
It's unincorporated, but it's basically surrounded by city limits. So you got Glen Haven, which is in town, but they developed under water and sewer regulations, and they asked for annexation. You got across from them, you got a multifamily neighborhood, and now you got city, the Country Lane project that just got it. It will be town, and then there's stuff that right beyond that. So if you haven't got a big enough tract of land where you can spend millions of dollars to extend sewer, and then you've also got I-40 or Interstate 42, that said when you bypass going through there, you don't have that infrastructure. You know, so the likelihood there's not that many tracts besides, say, County Packers tract that is even going to be big enough that anybody can say, I'm going to spend $5 million to put sewer out. You know, so to say the 20 acres on Big Pine Road or Jack Road, you know, should develop to town standards when they're going to. DOT's not going to take care of the curb cut. You know, DOT's not going to take care of the sidewalk. And the town's never going to annex because they haven't got the statutory right to annex. And it's kind of like, you know, you guys saying that like Riverwood, they won't ever come up and say, we'll voluntarily annex into the town. Like, when you got, you know, your septic tank in the backyard. And I know that part of Riverwood's got sewer, but that sewer through the county is not sewer through the tank.
Right.
That was developed when the county was allowing sewer connections on residential. So, we've got a lot, and then you talk about an extra mile beyond that, and you're talking about going out to Cornwallis Road, so some of those tracts of land that are out there that have been developed in 5 to 10 acre, pieces. You know what I mean? It's just, there's not enough vacant land to have that sewer.
Yeah.
We do have some guidance about where we think the town is going to go. The future land use map identifies for us areas of increased density or increased levels of activity, whether that's an employment center or another future land use designation that is more intense than, say, a residential subdivision at 1 unit an acre or 1 unit every 2 acres. So we have a little bit of guidance there. And the town has a wide variety of tools that it can use to ensure that at some point in the future, that development comes into the town. It doesn't have to just be annexation. It can be development agreement. There are a variety of things that are out there for people to use. I appreciate this discussion, and the point is, where is the common sense line for our quote unquote urban standards and our standards that are not so urban? Where is that common sense line? Let's figure that out based on the policy guidance that we've got, and then write the rules to recognize that right line distinction, and try to find a way so that in cases where something happens and something that we didn't expect to come into the town, because let's face it, septic tanks fail and sewer lines have to get extended and stuff gets annexed and comes in. Let's try to figure out a way so that we aren't creating unnecessary expenditures down the road to retrofit infrastructure that wasn't built to the standard before, before it came into town. So I appreciate the comment. I think that's something that we need to look into and figure out, how do we handle this?
I'm a huge realist. I believe in realism, and sewer tank, septic tank do fail. That's why the county and the state require you to have a secondary site for that failure happens, and that's why the state has rules in place where if you have both of them fail, you've got options to have additional options, because if you're 6 miles or 2 miles or 1.5 miles out, you can't extend the sewer line. So I just want to be realistic, and I'm gonna treat the ETJ residents as fairly as they should be treated, because right now they've been treated unfairly, because quite frankly, if you lived on a Baltimore Road and you had to shoot weeds and trees to get your neighbor's house, you call the town says we don't provide those services. You call the county says we don't provide those services, this is the town's ETJ. Call back the town says,
Oh,
hey, we can't do that. That's kind of.
My property on Baltimore Road is right next to that satellite annexation, Howard's Mini Mart. There's been issues happen 30 feet over there, that's the town. Wreck in front of the house, you don't even know if you should call the highway patrol or the Clayton police. I don't live there, but, you know, my mother does. So,
Those
yeah,
are
it's a real
real
deal.
We're not gonna solve all of those problems.
Yeah,
But we can bring some.
That's a key issue, right?
Understand. Okay, good. Other comments on procedures? Incorporate incentives and flexibility. So I've got a picture of a thermostat on the wall, and the reason that that is there is to show you that, generally speaking, predictability and flexibility are on different sides of the spectrum. The more predictable a set of regulations are, the less flexible they are, because they need to be predictable. The more flexible regulations are, the more I can go do something, whatever I want, whatever, let's go make a deal, the less predictable they are. Okay, so understand that there's a spectrum between predictability and flexibility. Where is that sweet spot for Clayton is something we need to talk about. Are there different sweet spots based on where you are in the community or what kind of development you're proposing? And so therefore, the reason that I've got this on here, we just talked about having a predictable development process. That's very important. We also need to have predictable standards, but we can't go so far down the road of predictability that we toss out the notion of flexibility, because flexibility is important, not one size fits all. We have to recognize there are different characters, different contexts, different sites, different issues at play, and we have to be able to accommodate those distinctions. So, incorporate incentives and flexibility is something that we would suggest, we explore, and we include. Up to and including sustainable development incentives. If you do things as part of your development that are good for the planet, then we will give you extra yield, or waive some requirements, or fast track your process, or something else that maybe we end up talking about and incorporating into the UDO. Sustainable development incentives, what the heck is that? So that might be reflective roof, reflective pavement, extra trees, more open space, oversized stormwater, LEED designation, whatever it is. There's lots and lots of different things that we can explore as means for applicants to incorporate into their development, and we should reward them for doing so in the form of some sort of, bonus or incentive or reduction, okay? So that's the concept of the sustainable development incentives. I know you probably have a lot of questions about it, and we will cover that in a lot of detail, but the notion that we would have such a thing is something that I'd like to put on the table. Administrative adjustments. This is a process where staff can allow a minor deviation in almost any numerical number in the code. 5% deviation, a 10% deviation. What's that for? It's for the tough sites, the problem sites that I can't make work and I don't have a hardship. Okay, so what do? Well, we can explore the use of the administrative adjustment that would maybe allow somebody to shave a foot off a setback to save an existing tree, or add an extra tree in a particular location as part of overall compliance with landscaping because I can't put it there because it's in the shade. That kind of thinking is what the administrative adjustment allows for. A tiered conditional zoning system. And what I mean by that is 3 levels. A very, very simple conditional rezoning where I'm simply reducing the range of allowable uses from what's in the book. I'm not changing anything else. I don't have to do a site plan. You know, it's a very simple, straightforward process. Maybe that's good for me and that's enough. Maybe I want to go a little bit farther. Maybe I'd like to add some additional standards because I think I need it to get the approval. So I might propose a limited standard rezoning, the middle of the continuum. Or maybe I want to go all the way to flexibility into a master plan kind of a concept. I'm not going to say plan development. I'm going to say a master plan conditional rezoning, okay? Because I know where we've been with plan development. It's not been good, so we're going to work on that. But this notion of a tiered system of conditional zoning is something that we need to explore, in my opinion, and I hope that you agree when it comes time for that. Conservation subdivisions are very much like open space subdivisions with a couple different twists. Number one, you set aside 50% of the land, or 60% of the land, or 70% of the land, okay? As open space forever. You don't have lot sizes. You don't have setbacks because you can't do lot sizes and setbacks on 30% of a yield. Okay, so you have to waive those kinds of things to allow the development to happen. Now, that's going to result in lots of houses real close together. My neighbors aren't going to like that. And frankly, I don't want to see it when I'm driving down the road. So what do we do about that? We incorporate screening provisions so that I can't see that development. I don't experience that development from a street or from a greenway or from a public space, or my neighboring residential neighborhood doesn't see that development. Now, this isn't going to work everywhere, but it's a way to get yield and set aside land in certain areas. It's an option that I would suggest we explore in a little bit more detail. Some communities require these in some places. I'm not sure that's appropriate for you guys, but I think having it as an option on the table might make some sense.
Can I say something about that one?
Please.
I know that would be something kind of new for this area. But someone showed me some examples of that, and I don't know what part of the country they were in, but I'm just to kind of throw it out to y'all, you can Google it, or maybe you can find some images. Like, they can be really well done. And then you appease a lot of the people I know that I've heard from in the community who are like, oh, it's all this development, there's no trees, there's nothing green left. It's a way to cluster that development and do it right, at least in the examples I saw, and then you still have a lot of green space around it. So you're getting your density, but you're getting green space too. So anyway, just throwing it out there.
That's very, very accurate and absolutely right. The one thing that I would add to that is this. Make sure that the screening that gets put in is screening adjacent to the road or adjacent to the neighborhood so that I don't see it. Because if I can't see it from my windshield or from my walking on the greenway, it doesn't exist. Okay? So that's important to think about. I think that we can make something like this work in some places, work effectively. Alternative minimum compliance are ways to adjust parking, landscaping, lighting, fencing, those kinds of development standards for unanticipated consequences. Like what? Let's say, for the sake of argument, we adopt a parking maximum instead of a parking minimum. And I want to have more parking spaces than the parking maximum allows. What's my process? Do I file a variance? No. Why? Because it's a hardship. So what do I do instead? I do an alternative minimum compliance plan. Okay? This is very common, very typical, and needs to be incorporated into your regulations so that you guys don't go brain dead and everything doesn't go to your board of adjustment. So we need this is an important safety valve that we need to incorporate into your provisions. It's not a gimme. There's lots of standards. In fact, if you're going to deviate from the minimum standards, it's necessary to provide a compelling reason why, and we'll set down very clear criteria for each one of those instances. I talked about density bonuses if you follow the single-family design guidelines, right? We can't apply standards. We can have guidelines. We can offer incentives for people to follow the guidelines. One of those incentives would be a density bonus. How much of the bonus? I don't know. We need to talk about that. Maybe it's a unit an acre. Maybe it's more. Maybe it's less. Maybe it's a scale. I don't know. We need to talk about that. But the concept is there. Another very interesting concept that came up during the stakeholder committee discussions that I'd like to explore with you guys is a notion of either increased density or reduced setbacks for lots that bound greenways, okay? Why? Because that creates an incentive to put in a greenway. I don't have to have such a big lot. It's less expensive for me to have a greenway. Maybe this is something that might work. I've never heard of that before. I think it's kind of cool, and I'd like to explore it with you guys, because I think the town wants greenways. Greenways cost money. How do we get the developer to put in more greenways? We make it favorable for them to do so. How do we do that? Well, we might consider density bonuses or lot size and setback reductions. Interesting idea. One that I think we should explore. Menu-based standards. We talked a lot about design standards. You can have all of the design standards in the world and still wind up with ugly buildings, okay? Believe me, it's true. Taste cannot be legislated. Taste is in the eye of the beholder. One of the ways to deal with that is to provide applicants with a menu of choices. Okay, you want to do a commercial building? Great. Here are the 6 different alternatives that you can choose from for how you're going to do the massing on the primary building wall. You can do this or that or the other. We don't care which, but you're going to do one of them or 2 of them, right? So a menu-based standard for the design provisions is very effective and one that I would suggest we explore. Okay? Questions about these?
I have a question about density.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
mean, as a downtown resident, I'm very cognizant of the balance between density and the cost of utilities and such, especially considering our most recent rate hikes. So, but I do think that there's a balance, and I'm wanting to know if there is a model that we are following on the degree of density in downtown Clayton. Because it seems that with there being, as Andrea said, this conservation subdivisions, that we are going to concentrate the environmental impact, the noise, the congestion, and such to certain areas of town, to people who have, that we as a town are favoring the developer with bonuses, then their peaceful enjoyment of their property. And so, where is this model, and, how can we feel comfortable that some people won't be unduly?
Sure, it's a great question.
harmed
Right.
from this?
I think anytime there's a density bonus contemplated, whether it's a sustainable development incentive or a conservation subdivision or it's for design standards, the essence of the design standard is compatibility with the surroundings. That's why we do design standards. That is how we render
Well,
sort
we've
of
done a poor
consistency.
job of it in the Cooper neighborhood recently. I mean, I look at those houses that are there, and you can't walk down the sidewalk anymore because the developer didn't put in enough garages for people to park. The houses are too large and the garages are too small, and so you can't walk on the sidewalk. People are walking their children's and strollers in the middle of the street. And, we've done a really poor job of protecting the people who live in the surrounding area, just safely being able to drive down the road. So I hope we really take that into account in the Cooper area, where where we put in huge subdivisions and apartments and townhomes, and, we've really overcrowded the area for the people who aren't from there.
Area cautionary tale.
I mean, look at the size of the garages on these homes, and you can't walk down the street without, dodging a baby carriage. So that's what we don't need to do.
Right. As far as the conservation subdivision goes, generally speaking, those are typically found in more suburban and even rural locations. It's not as common to see them in more urban locations, frankly, because the land costs are too high to justify that kind of a development.
And I certainly don't blame the people who live there. I mean, they've got 2 cars, one sitting on the sidewalk.
Right.
Yeah,
The 20-foot setback off of the edge of the right-of-way, so there's enough room for a car without hanging over the sidewalk, is absolutely well taken. Okay.
I had a question about conservation subdivisions. So the part where you said that the land is set aside forever, seems like, to me, like we're doing what we do with a lot of suburbs, which is where we build things out to completion and then expect them never to change, ever. Is that what we're doing here, or are we allowing for in the future, you know, when land use inevitably does change due to changing desires of the people who live there or of the market or what have you, will that be possible in the future?
Fantastic question. So, as far as the conservation subdivision goes, there are a variety of things that you can do in your land that you set aside. Like, you could do agriculture, you could raise cattle, you could grow trees that would ultimately be forested and cut down someday. Or you could just leave it as it is. And I think that the conservation subdivision is open to that. That's not the question you were asking, which is what happens when we actually want to use that land for something else? Somebody invents something new that we don't even know what it is today, and it comes along, and now we've got these great big swaths of land that are usable potentially for this new thing that we never thought of. How do we open up the opportunity for that land that's been protected forever to be used in this different way? It's a great question. I don't know the answer. I hope you have an answer. I think that's something interesting to think about. I definitely don't want us to saddle the staff to having to track anything or do anything like that, because frankly that doesn't work. We have to have a way for these conservation subdivision, deed restricted open spaces to evolve. And I don't quite know how that would happen yet. So if that is, as we go forward with this, if that's a concept that's got legs, we need to talk about how that's going to happen. It's an interesting idea, and I think it's probably likely, to be honest with you. You know, 60 years ago, we didn't talk about retrofitting parking lots in suburban malls, and here we are. So, okay. Questions on incentives, flexibility? Okay. We're almost done, guys. Key theme 6, fostering reuse and redevelopment. Okay. So, again, we don't know yet what's anticipated for downtown. So we can't really say. We have some rules of thumb in place in other communities. We have thinkers who have talked about ways to foster reuse and redevelopment. And we do have some experience in other places. Generally speaking, the kinds of standards that you might relax for downtown include parking, landscaping, typical kinds of open space, and dimensional requirements. Maybe there's some others. Generally speaking, in downtowns, buildings are closer together, lots are smaller, we do not have suburban style buffers, we do not have suburban style parking areas. We focus on integration, closeness, and we handle compatibility issues through design and architecture. Okay? So those are some of the kind of 30,000-foot philosophical ways that we handle development in the downtown. I would fully expect to see your updated downtown master plan anticipate reductions in parking, landscaping, open space, and dimensional requirements. I think that you should plan on that. I would be amazed if that doesn't happen, because those are the kinds of challenges that downtowns face. But there's some other aspects, okay? I mentioned it, or I alluded to it before, this waiving infrastructure retrofits. If I've got a vacant lot or a lot that has a building on it in downtown, and I've got $50,000 to invest in this building to bring my business to downtown, we say we want downtown, we want it to be vibrant, we want to have business here, we want to have places for the people. Fantastic, here's a building. Somebody wants to come and use it. They've got 50 grand to invest in this project, but we say, well, we need you to double the size of the street, we want you to put a sidewalk in, please upsize the sewer, and I'm gonna need street lights, and by the end of the day, the guy's like, you know what, I'm gonna go to Smithfield, thanks a lot, because it's just too expensive. So, we have to think about our infrastructure requirements and relax some of those standards. We have to find a balance between reuse, redevelopment, and our basic infrastructure model for greenfield sites. Okay? A more flexible approach to the non-conforming sites that we have in town. Okay? Get ready. Because when we finish this ordinance, the vast majority of lots in town are not going to comply with the development standards. The uses will be fine for the most part, but they aren't going to meet the landscaping standards, or they're not going to meet the parking standards, or the design standards, or the lighting standards, or the fencing standards, or the other kinds of standards that we have. And there'll be plenty. Okay? This is not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. How we handle reuse and redevelopment on those existing non-conforming sites is very important. We don't want to disincentivize reuse, redevelopment of these sites that don't conform. Okay, they were here before the new UDC, UDO came along. It's not their fault that they're non-conforming. They're non-conforming now. Let's not put them in a position where they can't be developed or redeveloped because compliance with the standards is simply cost prohibitive or frankly impossible. Okay? So being thoughtful about our approach to rendering compliance on non-conforming sites, very important. Infill development standards. So infill development standards are applied in built areas where there are existing vacant lots. They're also in places where I've got a building and I tear it down. Okay? Infill standards turn on context. They use contextual dimensional standards like setbacks and height requirements, building size provisions, and they use those contextual standards to avoid the need for variances, okay? Unless the development that's built doesn't comply with the context. I don't want to have a 5-foot setback in the front. I want to be 30 feet back. Okay, well, you can go get a variance for that. And you can, demonstrate to the Board of Adjustment your hardship for that. Sometimes it can happen, sometimes not. But the idea it takes our usual approach to dimensional standards and flips it on its ear and says, I'm not going to legislate a certain set of numbers for you, I'm going to suggest you follow the context. And if you can't follow the context, you've got to get a variance for that. Follow the context and you're fine. Most of the time, context numbers are ranges, okay? They're ranges. You have to be within 10 and 20 feet setback. You have to be within 3 and 3.5 stories. Your lot coverage has to be between 60 and 65%. That's how context for infill-based standards work. Okay? They're not for everywhere. They're only for these places where we want to see redevelopment. Okay? Neighborhoods that surround downtown. Vacant land that has been persistently vacant. Can't seem to get it to turn over. Promoting mixed use, I mentioned at the head of the conversation, mixed use should be our path of least resistance. We should be, I think that people 100 years ago got it right. They knew what mixed use was and how to do it. And frankly, a lot of development, particularly in urban settings, even small towns, was mixed use. And for some reason, we got away from that. We know why, but we got away from it. And so let's get back to it. It's very efficient. It's cost effective. And unfortunately, our standards right now in Clayton are getting in the way of it. So how do we move those stops and get them out of the way so that it's easier to do mixed-use development? Not just in downtown, everywhere. Okay? Adaptive reuse is a concept that we'll talk about. If you do have persistently vacant or underutilized light industrial, heavy commercial sites, can't get anybody in there. This adaptive reuse option, where you treat any use as an adaptive reuse and don't require a rezoning, might be something you want to explore, maybe not, but we'll talk about it. You guys can make a decision when the time comes. We'll talk about that, okay? Last theme. Questions on this? It is, how long are we running till? We passed it already? You guys okay? We're okay, keep going? We only have another 14 hours. Okay. Key theme 7. Greater range of housing choice. So we're facing a housing crisis. You guys know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. It's particularly difficult here in the Triangle, and even more difficult where you guys are. Okay? And so we're suggesting a handful of remedies for that, including allowance for a wider range of housing types by right. like duplexes by right in every residential district. Maybe that's too far, let's talk about it. Triplexes, quadplexes, by right in the higher density districts. Upper story and live work units by right in non-residential districts. So a wider range of housing types across the board that don't require a special use permit or a rezoning, okay? Because the surest way to kill any kind of affordable housing or housing option is to require a rezoning, okay? Because it's not going to pass. So if we're committed to this, then we need to make this stuff permitted by right. What do we have to do with that? We have to address compatibility. How do we do that? With design provisions, okay? Difficult to apply design provisions to single-family homes. So we'll talk about how that works when the time comes. One way that folks are doing this is with these kind of small house, small lot options. And maybe you've heard of some of these things like bungalow courts or pocket neighborhoods or other jargony things like detached townhouses or whatever. You know, little clustered communities of 10 or 12 units on a small site that are served by a private street that are sort of like their own little enclave. Those kinds of small lot, small house options are becoming ever more popular. You know, in Cary, they call them patio homes. They're individual homes, but they're not on their own lot. Some options here for us to explore, see what you guys think, see if you're comfortable, see if Clayton's ready for this kind of thing. Accessory dwelling units. You can do those in Clayton if you get a special use permit. Okay? The surest way to know that you're not going to get an approval is to use a rezoning or special use permit. It's frankly too difficult, most people walk away, or they do it under the radar. And so we want to try a different approach, and perhaps even allow or calibrate for internal versus detached accessory dwelling units. Multifamily townhouse. The one point that I would like for you guys to hear and take in tonight is multifamily needs to be by right in a multifamily district. Okay? You don't have a multifamily district, you need one. And multifamily and townhouse development should be by right in that district. Okay? How it is done now is nutso. I'm sure that there are reasons for it. I don't know. I'm not going to criticize people who've come in the past, but it's causing consternation on the part of the development community. It's causing consternation on the part of the staff. It's causing consternation on the part of the elected officials. We got to get this fixed. I'm not saying we allow multifamily and townhouses everywhere, but we do need a place to allow it with some standards and a clear process. And that should alleviate some of the challenges that you guys have been experiencing. Tiny homes. Allow them, but no, there's a lot of different flavors of these things, right? Some of them are site-built. That's a different kind of a tiny home than a tiny home that's built on a chassis somewhere else. A tiny home built on a chassis is a manufactured home, okay? You got to treat it like a manufactured home. You have specific rules for manufactured homes that were written without even thinking about what a tiny house is and its needs. So it's important to make that distinction, right? Tiny home is a site-built, tiny home is a manufactured. A tiny home is also a mobile or a movable tiny home. It's got wheels and it's on a chassis. Your building inspector will have a mental breakdown if you say, I want you to review and approve tiny homes on chassis with wheels, because building codes don't apply. Okay? Those are transportation codes that apply to those kinds of structures. Now, people like tiny homes on wheels. We should try to find a way to accommodate them, recognizing that they are essentially RVs or travel trailers, but that's not to say we can't find a way to accommodate them in the right places with some standards, but we can't treat them like a site-built home or a manufactured home. They're different, okay? Live-work units, this is where you live above your store, right? What a crazy concept. I would hazard a guess to say that the majority of your downtown buildings have something like this, or this was contemplated when they were built, is I have my business downstairs and I live upstairs, where I rent the upstairs to somebody else. It's very hard to do now. Most local government standards don't allow these kinds of things. I don't think UDC has any live-work standards in it. So, let's work on that and bring these kinds of choices back, you know, pretty much everywhere. That's it on the standards. I know we have lots of topics. I know there's a lot of details. I've drawn a big brush, and I know you guys want to talk about more of the meat, more of the details. And I hear you, I feel you on that. We're going to make it happen. I don't know how, but we'll get an answer for you. Please, sir.
Just a request on the key theme 7, if someone could take the time, if there are examples in the greater triangle of some of these houses, if that could be sent to the committee. I know, speaking at least for myself, it'd be interesting I've seen some of these in person, but I'd like to drive and see what do these developments actually look like. A picture's nice, but to see firsthand how's it working, to the Rebecca's comments earlier that, something was built and now there's no place to walk, even though there's sidewalks and those kinds of things. I'd like to see some real life examples, so I think it would be helpful to have a list of, here's what's in the triangle, let's do individual site visits if we so choose.
Okay.
And I've lived in some areas where these possibilities have been, and I can tell you, some of them become very undesirable very quick. So I hope that we would provide for some type of, look at their codes and see what they are, and see if they would be sustainable for 10, 20 years down the road, that we make sure that whatever we're setting it up for isn't something that becomes an option.
Everything's great when it's new.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Doesn't stay that way.
So, but I mean, can we look at those models, right, and see if they fit in some kind of,
And absolutely, that's why I want to see it live rather than
Yeah.
just on a picture, for that very reason.
Because they're not going to show, you're not going to get a picture of what it looks like today. You're going to get a picture of what it looks like when it was built.
Yeah.
20 years from now, which is what we could tour and look at, we'll see what it's going to look like down the road.
right? And in the last week, I mean, one of the reasons that you listed here was for people to be able to walk and to reduce the impact on driving. I mean, in the last week, I've walked to the grocery store twice, and my option is compare foods, and while I love that that's downtown, I mean, that's not gonna sustain the population density, these multiple family units. So, where are we promoting that type of environment downtown for these people to not have a food desert, to get food?
Well, I mean,
I
if
also
you-
walk to Lee's Produce, and, fresh food, but we need more options than Lee's and Compare for people to walk to downtown. If that's our
on the
intent.
topic of food deserts and things like that, in a lot of our larger suburban communities, if you make under a certain amount and you can't really afford a car at the moment, you're basically stranded without any way to get to a store. I've heard from neighbors in my neighborhood, where one of their cars broke down, both of their cars broke down, something like that happened. And they had to go without groceries for like a week or two, and they're basically running on fumes at that point. And that kind of stuff. And I've even heard from my neighbors, unprompted, that we need some kind of option for corner stores in a lot of our neighbors, things that are compliant with the neighborhoods we already have, even single-family neighborhoods, where there's options to bring in small-scale character-building businesses that allow these neighborhoods to have they serve multiple uses. First of all, they prevent food deserts, like you said, but they also are good places to meet your neighbors. I mean, we have these neighborhoods where you're kind of all siloed into your own houses and you don't ever see your neighbors. That's not how I grew up. I grew up in a sort of denser community up in Pennsylvania, and you could walk down the street and see your neighbors at the store. As my grandpa used to say, you can't send your kids to get you a pack of cigarettes anymore. I would say a gallon of milk, but he smoked. So those kinds of things, integrating sort of small-scale businesses that aren't going to disrupt communities. I mean, nobody's going to object to a small-scale cafe in their neighborhood if it doesn't produce too much traffic or too much noise. That's not really something that's ever going to happen if you do it right.
I concur. Small-scale neighborhood serving non-residential uses should be permitted by right in the moderate to high-density residential zoning districts. And I agree with what you're saying. I think the one challenge that we have in terms of success with those kinds of things is making sure that there are people who actually want to run the corner store in the neighborhood, which, that's a horse of a different color. We can build it. That doesn't mean that they'll come. Sometimes, in some places, some communities build it and then they pay them to come. I don't know if you're ready to do that or not, but that's something that's done.
And we've had corner stores, we've had little mom and pop shops.
Red and white.
They went away for a reason. Somebody, they couldn't compete with something you could drive your car to.
But now we're saying that we're gonna build this for that purpose that is gone, right? The red and white is gone, right? And there's a house being built on it today, so we can't bring that back anymore. And so we're building this dream for something that are we gonna be able to make it happen, right? This dream, are we creating this very dense population with small houses for people who are gonna walk to a corner store that does not exist? Which is what this is saying, is that we're doing this so that people can walk and enjoy an area, but I mean, the choices for them to enjoy are very limited.
Well,
But
part
I
of,
think you don't have to have, first of all, you say corner store, I have a negative connotation of corner store, we're gonna put that out.
Okay.
Okay, and I think when he's referencing corner store, I don't think he's meaning a small grocery store, I think he's meaning a small convenience store. But as you look at Wendell Falls, I think that's a neighborhood whereas the whole community, except for probably Encore, just on the other side of it, the whole community can walk to the Publix and that new commercial district they're building there. It's a very walkable community with the sidewalks, not just sidewalks, very wide sidewalks
Right.
throughout the community. But you have a commercial center that's there. Publix is already there, but they have a commercial center that they're building.
It's lucky.
But if you understand that neighborhood and how it's laid out through golf carts, which that's another issue that you see a lot of the residents have driving on these public streets without tags, and that's not allowed. That's a whole other thing. But that's the type of community, but you're really talking like James said, that's a large community that's being fed by a really close by grocery store. The same thing with Flowers Plantation with the Harris Teeter. A lot of people can walk there. Some of the neighborhood can walk there, take a golf cart there. If you've been back and you've seen that. And the commercial and the residential that's going to probably go behind the Publix. Those are walkable communities also. But I think the realism is, are we going to have grocery stores in every neighborhood, would every neighborhood want them? To me, if there was a corner store in my neighborhood, I'm trying to figure out how to egress. It's not something I want because I see a different perspective. I know what it's going to look like in 10 years. I'm a realist. It's just like the neighborhoods you're talking about, like Cooper. We talked about this on the planning board, like Parkview, which is a fairly new neighborhood, but already a neighborhood that's 3 years old has that same issue you're talking about parking. But you already see, it's only about 3 years old. I think anybody that rides through there, you can envision what it's going to look like in 10 years. But we allowed it.
Yes.
There was no
That's 2
vision.
blocks from my house.
Oh, okay. So I think that when we start talking all these terms, people talking about food deserts, the realism is, the reality of it, are you going to have a grocery store every 4 or 5 blocks in every community? No. I mean, I don't think I would want to waste my time trying to figure out how can we have a grocery store every 4 or 5 blocks where people can walk to. First of all, developers are not going to build it. It's not going to be sustainable financially. So I think if you're going to have conversations, I think we need to have realistic conversations about what's sustainable. Not these idealistic conversations, they're fine. But if I'm going to be here for another 7 meetings, I really don't want to talk about idealism. I want to talk about realism.
And that's my point, is that this is gonna cause, this right here, I fear will cause congestion. And, because everybody who lives in these very small house, small lot options, the townhomes, the multifamily, the tiny houses in the town jurisdiction, right, in the town, has to go to a grocery store. They have to get in their car. So what does that do for our environmental impact? And what does it do for our noise? What does it do for our traffic in downtown? Because the envision here is that they're gonna walk to a grocery store, and I'm with you, it doesn't exist, and with this, I'm not sure that a developer's gonna bring in a Publix in the middle of downtown for these people to walk to.
Well, so what I was sort of referencing when I said corner store, I think maybe the concept got a little mistranslated. What I'm referencing is what I grew up with, what we call a bodega, right? That's a little corner store that sells just about everything you could ever need. It's very, very small. They don't take up hardly any space. And they don't obviously sell everything, but they sell enough that, you know, when I was with my grandparents, they'd send me down the street, get, you know, the rice and beans that we'd need for the day and come back, and that was it, right? It was no big deal. We did it all the time. You could even buy your daily groceries there type deal, right? What I'm talking about is changing the codes so that small neighborhood things like that are by right. So the market, and the market here being the people who actually live in that neighborhood, can basically decide for themselves if that is sustainable and not having us do it from the top down. And what I mean by that is allowing these things to get built by individuals who actually live in those neighborhoods. If that's converting, you know, first floor of their house, so be it, right? Something like that, something small and sustainable, so that if it doesn't work, they can easily reconvert that, you know, into their living room, whatever, you know, rent it out, do whatever they're gonna do with it. But if it does work, that can become a community staple without having to build a, you know, 20,000 square foot Publix in the middle of these little neighborhoods, because that is obviously unsustainable. Not every neighborhood needs large mega stores for small neighborhoods. You know, growing up, I didn't even understand the concept of a large store like that because they didn't exist where I lived. Because everybody, you know, did it the traditional quote unquote way, which was allowing these small things in smaller communities so that people could go to local places to get local produce, for example. It was never meant to be a whole large scale thing, and it's not supposed to be on the same scale. It's not meant to compete with those bigger stores. It's meant to fill a different niche, a more local niche, if that makes sense. And it's supposed to disappear when the demand is no longer there and easily be reconverted into other things.
All right, guys. We've been at this for a couple hours. I see people packing up, so let's go home. I wanted to mention that we're doing a public forum tomorrow night in this room, tomorrow night. First, we'll run from 11:30 to 1:30. We'll do a short presentation at 12:30 and then be around for questions and answers. Those of you with questions, this would be a good time to come because I'll be here and staff will be here and we can talk. So I encourage you to do that. We will be asking for comments and feedback. And we do anticipate incorporating into the document, you saw one of the appendices focuses on comments. And this is one of the first times that we've done anything like this before, where we're actually prepare a document and then we anticipate amending that document to incorporate comments that we receive after we've put the document out. So just another reason or another example of how we expect this to be a living document that will continue to evolve and change up until, you know, August or so. Unless you guys want to spend a lot of time with me, in which case we can talk about this a lot, as much as you want to. Anyway, folks will be able to submit comment cards at the forum. We are also going to be asking people to comment online about the diagnosis on the participate page, which is shown there in the middle of the screen. So that's all I have. I would ask you guys to let us put our heads together and talk about how we move forward with addressing detailed questions and promulgating that information back to the group. What else would you guys like to do? How else would we like to change these meetings going forward to work better for you? Is there anything that we would do, could do, should do differently, or a different kind of approach, or a different plan, or what have you? I just want to check in with folks and say, does this work? Do you want to make some suggestions about how to do it differently? One thing that I'd like to say is I really don't want to be behind you guys. I need to be like there, or we need to be together, because I can't see you, so I can't read your body language. I don't know if what I'm saying is making you angry, or you're happy, or what. So you know, that's definitely something going forward I'm going to ask for is this continued kind of more intimate setting where you're not at the dais, where we're at a table together and that I can see everybody. What else? Is there anything else that we need to do?
I feel like in order to be productive, an agenda where we know, check, this is what we gotta do. This is what's happening this meeting.
Okay.
And in line with the process. I think that would be helpful, and if we could know that coming in, we would be a little bit more prepared to nail down the details more quickly.
Okay, very good, very good.
I agree. We need to get the sounds figured out.
Yeah.
The sound?
Sound, the microphones and all that stuff, whatever.
This room.
Exactly.
I would just horseshoe the tables around you, probably, this makes the most sense.
I really like to
I heard
walk.
you fine.
If I can't
Anybody
move
else
my
fine?
hands and walk and.
I think it's fun that you held the
Yeah,
microphone the whole
like you
time,
could
had
hear
worked
it,
the whole
right?
night, but you had it.
I heard him over here.
You've been committed to it, but
I don't know if my mom
Well, Ben, I'm gonna hand it back to you.
No, but I'm trying to look at you.
You were very
They've been
expressive.
advertised
I can't.
through the town's
Sit over
social
there next
media, on the town's website, on the Codified Clayton website. We also sent an email directly to the development community. We have a listserv for the development community that we sent out on Friday, I believe, so.
what is your anticipation of what kind of turnout? What has happened in other communities that you've been involved in? When they've done this?
It's hit and miss.
People don't care about the zoning ordinance. They care about how it affects their property. They do not care about how it affects other places.
So you're not expecting a massive turnout?
I'm not expecting a massive turnout. We are anticipating a handful of public forums. We might suggest shuffling budget around so that we spend more time with you guys instead of spending money on public forums where nobody's gonna show up. So that might be a possibility. Let's see how things go tomorrow.
And just to finish up before you adjourn, I will be sending you an email here shortly this evening. I've taken the Word document of the diagnosis report and I've put that on a SharePoint site and made it so you can make comments. So what I'm asking you to do, I'm giving you a couple weeks to go in and put your comments in that SharePoint site. It's a SharePoint, so everyone here will have the same link, will be commenting on the same documents, so you'll be able to see each other's comments. And then staff and consultant, we're gonna use that document to guide our future discussions. And then I will be back in touch with y'all via email, hopefully this week or next, with the date for the next meeting. I also wanna let you know, I think, most likely the next meeting will not be on a planning board meeting night. So it'll probably be a different meeting, it'll probably be a different time, a different night. Probably start a little bit earlier with the possibility going later. I can also investigate, see if maybe the town can find it, if we can find it in our budget to feed you, which always makes it a little bit better. And also as part of that, we will plan it for more of a work session type meeting. So we probably will not be in this room. We'll probably be in one of the other rooms in a little more intimate setting where we don't have to worry about cameras. Again, we're in this room tonight because this is also the planning board meeting. We needed to be able to live stream the meeting. The next meeting, or meetings where we have these detailed work sessions, probably will not be that type of format. So, as far as schedule goes, again, Chad and I will get together and we'll plan out the next, at least 1 or 2 meetings for y'all over the next month or so. August 1st, during the council's work session that afternoon, they will be talking about the diagnosis report, and we have some specific questions we will be asking council to get guidance from them on. And then after that, really the next scheduled big check-in is in September, at the end of September, with the annotated outline, when that will be back to you at your September meeting. We have a public forum already scheduled on the annotated outline as well at the end of September, with currently right now the plan to go to council with that in October, at the beginning of October. So we are trying to keep this on schedule. If we need to add more meetings, we certainly can. But again, we really are trying to keep this on schedule so that we can wrap this thing up. A, not only just to wrap it up, but B, the longer we take doing this, the longer it takes to be able to implement this or put these new regulations in place, and the more chances for development to come in under the current regulations that, may be a little bit different if we have the new regulations in place. So, but I do really appreciate, and I know Chad appreciates how much time Many of you have spent on this, obviously have spent on this document going through your detailed comments, and I do encourage you to go in, like I said, you'll get this email shortly from me. Go in, start adding your comments on that document, and we can use that as a guide and keep this project moving. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Planning Board Chair Moore to close us out and adjourn.
All righty, well, thank you, Ben. We don't have any public hearings scheduled or new business. That being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn by a planning board member.
A motion to adjourn?
Motion made by Board Member Bennett. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Williams. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.